Welcome back, everybody. Today we are reviewing Monster Sanctuary. Now, what is this game? Well, in the words of one of the developers, it is a unique idea combining a monster taming game like Pokemon with side view visuals and exploration known for Metroidvania games and turn-based combat typical to JRPGs. That description is great because it highlights the three primary components of this title. 1, the monsters. 2, the exploration, and 3, the combat. And I'm going to dive into each of them, but there's a lot of details and a lot of mechanics that we should probably talk about first, just to help you understand this game. So to do that, I'm going to take you back to day 1 of my adventure, and I'm going to walk you through the different things that I experienced, and we'll be able to explain the mechanics along the way. So the game begins with you choosing one of 4 spectral familiars to be your main companion. And this monster is going to be involved in the story, it's going to have a lot of dialogue, but don't feel like you have to keep it in your party. If for whatever reason you want to sideline it, there's no problem with that. It doesn't affect anything. You will start your adventure with some exploration, doing a little basic platforming, and you can see indeed the game is Metroidvania style. Every sub-region on the world map has a percentage of exploration completed, and so it can be fun trying to get 100% in any particular area. That's what I enjoy doing for the bulk of my playtime, and how you go about that is probably the coolest thing to me. So you can see here in the footage that my spectral wolf is following me around. That is my overworld monster, and every monster in your collection has an overworld ability. In the case of my wolf, I can press X, it'll slash the area in front of him, and if there is a destructible wall, the wall will break, revealing a hidden treasure or maybe a hidden path, and there will be a new area to discover. If I have a flying monster as my overworld companion, I can press X in the middle of a jump, and it'll lift me just a little bit higher, maybe to get to a platform that I wouldn't otherwise be able to jump to. And there's so much more available, but I just don't want to go into all of it right now. Keep a lot of it as a surprise for you. However, I will say, because I actually got stuck in the game and trying to do my exploration, I came across some obstacles that I wondered, is this going to be unlocked as part of the story, or am I missing something else? Have I just not found a switch? What's going on over here? I realized that some higher level monsters that you will encounter, they're called champion monsters. A lot of them have unique overworld abilities that you're going to need to bypass many of these obstacles. How do you get the champion monsters in your collection? Well, you're going to need to battle them and get 5 stars on them. So it's a good time to get into battling and all that kind of stuff and adding monsters to your collection. As you play through the game, you're going to see these little groups of monsters, usually 3 at a time on the ground. Bump into one of them, bang. It starts the turn-based combat instance. I'll get back to the combat mechanics later. For now, let's just say you beat them, and then when you beat them, you get a combat evaluation, ranging from 1 to 6 stars. Now, the 6th star is a bonus star if you beat the combat in 1 or 2 moves. Anyways, for much of your game, you're only going to be worried about trying to get as close to 5 stars as possible, and what that does for you is it increases your odds of getting rare drops. Now, those could be materials used for upgrading, they could be potions, or, if you're really lucky, you're going to get a monster egg. So if I come across a group with a slime, a mushroom, and a bird, and I'm missing the bird from my monster collection, I'm hoping that that bird's egg is going to drop. And then what do you do with the egg? You simply select it from your inventory, you hatch it, and now the monster is part of your collection. Getting 5 stars in battles is really important, especially with those champion monsters. That is how you add a champion monster to your party, by 5-starring it in battle. Now is a good time to talk about battling and combat and focusing on the other aspect of monsters, not just collecting and using their overworld abilities, but their skill trees. So when I first started playing the game, the skill trees are really what allured me. I love this aspect of different RPGs when you get to customize your characters to do different things in battles, right? Having a balanced party composition, or maybe focusing on offense, or using stall tactics. Now, when I made my bite-size review, and I talked about the game after 4 hours of playing, I was actually a little bit underwhelmed by everything. And one of the main reasons for that is the game just felt too slow. I started to get about 10, 12, 15 monsters in my collection, but it just didn't feel like I would be able to explore them all as much as I wanted to without investing much more time and grinding, etc. So my advice for everybody is don't focus too much on getting caught up on what each and every monster can do early on. Focus on a few that are maybe your favorites and work on progressing through the story. And here's a tip for you and why you should not worry about leveling all of your monsters evenly. When you hatch a monster from an egg, I believe it is 2 levels lower than your current highest level monster. So you might want to focus on advancing the story with about 6 monsters. Every now and then, if you hatch an egg and you really like the way that monster looks, or you like the abilities from having faced it in battle, go ahead, mix it in your party. Even play with 8 or 10 monsters, it's not a big deal. My point is, though, don't try to spread yourself too thin, because that will take forever trying to level up your monsters through combat. Instead, level fewer monsters, get different monster eggs, and then hatch them to match your higher levels. So, you've got your favorite monsters, they're all roughly around the right level for you to use them in your party, and it's time to start skilling them up and equipping them with different armors and getting all their stats, etc. There's a lot to do when it comes to combat. This is definitely the aspect with the most depth in the game, probably because there's a PvP component, which I never bothered messing around with. But there's a lot of in-game challenges that you can do where you still need to spend time customizing your party and I guess trying to min-max your party to do the most damage or to achieve whatever it is you want. So going back to those skill trees, if I have my Spectral Wolf, I might want to start speccing him into dealing AoE damage that applies a frost debuff. You might have another monster that's focused on another variety of debuff. Maybe one of your monsters is going to be a healer and a support monster to make sure that you guys do more attacks per turn or don't take as much damage. I think that you can mess around however you want and you're going to have some general success for about 80 to 90% of the game. The only hiccup every now and then is going to be on a champion battle or a main storyline battle. And that might throw you for a loop. You might have to substitute one different monster in because you can tell that there's some weakness in the enemy that you should exploit, or it's burning you with damage over time every turn, so you want to mitigate that somewhat. You'll figure out those obstacles as you come across them. Towards the end of the game, however, the battles really dragged on and became stall-oriented. I wasn't having a fun time doing combat anymore, but I still wanted to engage with it because I wanted those monster eggs and to add those monsters to my collection. But the battles started taking far too many turns. I found myself needing to use a shield monster at the start of my party, needing to use buffs, needing to mitigate the enemy's debuffs, and usually only able to use one damage dealer because there was just too much going on with buffs and debuffs flying all over the place. From what I read online, that was a lot of people's experiences as they got towards the end of the game, is everything just became a little too stall-oriented. So for me, that is when combat really took a hit, and by that point, I didn't even want to use too many monsters because it was just too time-consuming, exploring all the different varieties that I could. I liked a few designs, I liked a few monsters that I'd been using earlier in the game, or I liked a couple monsters that just seemed blatantly overpowered, and so I kept my party fairly neat and tidy, and I only did a few substitutions as needed. And it's worth mentioning that you can also buff up your monsters by equipping different items to them. They've got 4 item slots, and those equipment pieces can also be upgraded by a blacksmith that is in your main central hub area. It's honestly crazy how much you can do to enhance your monsters, and I haven't even talked about 2 more monster mechanics yet. One of them, evolutions, I'll just get through really quickly. As you play the game, you might not realize, or maybe you will, some of the monsters that you come across look very familiar to ones you saw earlier in the game. They just look, like I said, evolved, and they probably are. So at some point in the game, you'll unlock evolution. If you have the right evolution material, then you can take that monster and the material to one area in the game, and bang, you get to upgrade the monster and evolve it that way. The nice thing about that is that the evolved form is not necessarily superior to the base form. Maybe the base form, because of it having a different skill tree, it is more suited to how you want to play the game. And so you could still use the base form, and you could use the evolution if you'd like. The last element of monster customization that I'll talk about today is with shifting. So after a certain point in the game, you will unlock the option to have light shifted and dark shifted monsters in the world. They will start appearing in combat, and so if you defeat one of them, you might get a light or a dark shifted egg of that monster. When you hatch it, it'll be that way. You can also acquire items, simply use them on your monster, and it'll shift them to light or dark, or shift them to the other if they are already light or dark variants. Hope that's not too confusing. What happens when you have a light or a dark shifted monster, and is it necessary that you play with them? No, it is not. What I noticed, and I could be wrong on this, is that they have different passive effects and different passive abilities. So in the top right of the skill tree, right up here, every monster has these passives. Maybe they get a bonus to wind damage. Well, it could be that the dark shifted monster also gets a resistance to a certain type of attack. Or maybe the light shifted monster also has an additional bonus to shielding the party. I didn't even notice this when I had light and dark shifted monsters unlocked. I only saw that there was probably something to do with them when I took a glance at the PvP option in the game, and I saw that a lot of the high level players were using a dark shifted version of the monster that I had in my party, and I wondered, okay, what exactly is it doing better than what I'm using right now? And then again, 5-10 hours after that, I discovered, oh, there's these little passives in the top right corner. I know that I've spent a long time detailing the intricacies of the mechanics here with the combat and the exploration of the monsters, because I feel like your overall enjoyment of the game is going to be dependent on one of those three things. However much you like the exploration or maybe dislike the combat is going to affect how you feel about the game more than what else is written down here. The designs, the pixel art, the music, and the story. I mean, the story could have been anything. It was nothing spectacular. The music is fine in the background, but these aren't any tracks that I'm going to want to go back and listen to. So really, what do you get out of the gameplay? That is most important. And what I found from reading and just kind of gauging different people's receptions to the game is those who loved the game really enjoyed the combat. Those who kind of liked the game and would give it a 6 or a 7 out of 10 like me, my favorite element was the exploration. And that typically is the case when I play other JRPGs too. Final Fantasy, for example. I enjoy getting into every nook and cranny of the world map, trying to open up every single treasure chest, but what I don't care to take on is the various super bosses in the game that require more planning, a little more strategy, usually a little bit more time. If we compare these champion battles to the super bosses of Final Fantasy, these aren't necessarily going to be as stall-oriented. Your first time encountering them in the main story, sure, you may have some difficulties trying to figure out how to crack their defenses and how to bring them down, and your battles might take 8, 9, or 10 turns. However, when you go about it engaging them as challenges, you are formulating and strategizing to bring them down as quickly as possible to try to maximize your chances of 5 stars. And what does that mean? Typically, can you get a lot of burn damage, a lot of poison damage, etc. You're not actually stretching the battle out, you're actually trying to condense it with a lot of heavy damage really quickly. But again, there's still a time investment because you have to plan your party. And so by the time I was going to allocate 40 points for my 20th monster, I had just had enough. I did a few 5-star challenges so that I could get those champion monsters' eggs and have their abilities for exploration, but I just don't have it in me, neither the time nor the desire to continue to do this. But this is the aspect of the game with the most replayability, the combat. Let's sum it all up now. First, I want to give my praise to Moirai Games, the developers. I think they've done a fantastic job in creating an experience with a lot of depth and a lot of various mechanics. However, most of them are combat-oriented. And so if you are not drawn to this JRPG-style battling and having to develop different parties to overcome different obstacles and different challenges, you won't get the same kick out of the game as a lot of the game's biggest fans. The exploration was great, but even that was a little bit of a time investment and required quite a bit of backtracking if you didn't have monsters already in your collection. As far as the monster collecting goes, it's fine. You know what? If you want to go nuts and try to have one of every basic plus light shifted plus dark shifted monster in your collection, go for it. There's as much or as little there as you want to do with it. And PvP is still a thing, I believe. There should be an active player base there. So if you want to get involved in the hardest challenges, then go nuts and knock yourself out there as well. For those of you interested in purchasing this game and you want to play it on PC or Steam Deck, check out Fanatical, at least at the time of making this review. You can see on screen here, Fanatical's got this great deal. I forget the exact number that each game is coming down to, about $220 Canadian if you buy a minimum of 3. So go ahead, grab Monster Sanctuary, another game that I've talked about, Garden Story, and then, I don't know, throw in a third random game, whatever looks cool, Train Valley or something like that. Also, if you're going to play the game on Steam, I don't know what it is, but I enjoyed playing it on the Steam Deck far more than I did on desktop. Something about being able to shrink the game down, and there's obviously no loss in graphics because you're just dealing with a 2D game anyway, so it is really well suited to the Steam Deck screen. This felt more immersive. This felt more engaging and more enjoyable. The desktop was a bit of a cold, boring, tiresome experience. Not doing a great job explaining it because I don't really know exactly what's going on there anyways. All I know is that I typically enjoy my 2D games on a handheld, and maybe you're the same. Maybe that's how we grew up or something. Let us finally and properly wrap this long video up. If you are a fan of monster collecting, you can have a decent time with this game, but I do think you would enjoy something like a Pokemon title a little bit more. Why? Pokemon is breeding. Pokemon has more engaging mechanics when it comes to monster collecting. Monster Sanctuary very much feels like a checklist. Did I get my light shifted monster? Check. Did I get my dark shifted monster? Check. Do I have the neutral form? Do I have the evolution? Check, check, check. That is what it feels like. Like you've got OCD and you're just trying to get it all done. I would say the exploration in this game is more or less on par with other Metroidvania titles. I don't have too many that I can compare it to. If I were to compare it to Metroid Dread, then I would say that Dread is actually a little more fun in the exploration department than this game. Dread is faster, it's action-oriented, so how you explore feels different than this game. Monster Sanctuary is going to be a little bit slower, and sometimes when you get to an area and you don't have the right monster to be able to progress, it is a bit of annoying backtracking, trying to find where that monster is, or having to go back to the monster keep and trying to do a champion battle and get the 5 stars to get that champion who you think will help you progress. Although you might not even know. A lot of those things you're going to have to look up online. So there's a little more frustration involved with the exploration here. Finally, however, the combat. I do think that the combat is what reigns supreme in this game. It happens to be my least favorite element as far as my personal tastes, but I can recognize and acknowledge that the combat has the most depth to it out of all the other components in this game. Now, in the single-player experience, like I said, it starts off being pretty fun. You've got this variety of monsters, and you quickly realize you're not necessarily going to have the time or the desire to go through all these different skill trees, so you're going to stick with a fairly small party. And then you get towards the end of the game, and the battles start to ramp up in difficulty. They change and become more stall-oriented. Well, you get through the main game, and then maybe in the post-game you decide to do something like those champion battles. You might think that they're stall-oriented, but then you realize you just need a very specific type of party composition to get through them as quickly as possible. What is the PvP like? I have no idea. Are there a variety of different strategies in PvP? Maybe. Even in the single player, a variety of strategies are possible and viable, but they're just not all optimal. And so if you are going to spend the time going through all your different monsters and trying to get them all battle ready, it's, again, it's another checklist sort of activity. I'll make one last comparison to Pokemon, and this will really cement how I feel about the combat in this game. So Pokemon has different competitive tiers for battling. You have your overused tier, which is where a lot of the strongest Pokemon in that current metagame reside. They're the ones that are being picked most often. And the lower you go, the less viable the Pokemon are become. They just don't hold a candle to the overused tier of Pokemon. And you kind of get the sense of that here in Monster Sanctuary as well. Yes, every single monster is viable and it can work in a team, but it's not going to be optimized to accomplish whatever challenge you have in mind. You're going to need to use a smaller set of monsters to get that done. And finally, the very last thing I want to mention is that Moirai Games, the developers, are working on another title, Ethermancer. And from the looks of that trailer, it looks like Monster Sanctuary on steroids. The battling, the graphics, everything seems to be enhanced. So if you're already a fan of this game, I would say keep your eyes open for development on that title. For everybody else, thank you for watching. Again, if you have any questions, any comments, or you want to have any sort of conversation, I will see you in the comments section. All right? Thanks again for watching, and see you in the next video. Bye-bye.